This training video will provide you with an introduction to the methods we use at Godfrey Johnson to manage documents using Microsoft SharePoint Online, which is part of a bigger overall application set called Microsoft Office 365. Before we get too much further along, let's address one key concern that every firm or organization has whenever it introduces new technology. And that is that some folks just don't like change. Change involves learning how to do things that you don't presently know how to do, and it's that lack of knowledge that causes discomfort. It's not the change itself, it's the unknown. So the purpose of this training that you're receiving now by video is to take the unknown and make it known so that your comfort level comes up quickly. It is our goal as a law firm to continuously improve everything that we do. One of the reasons we've moved our cloud-based document management system away from our premises-based server, meaning a machine that sits in one of our storerooms, is to allow us to enjoy the benefits of constantly advancing technology. Some folks claim, I'm just an old-fashioned person. What that means is, I can't learn. Or perhaps it means, I just can't learn technology. It's a fact that old-fashioned people will never completely vanish from the earth. There's always some remnant of their presence, but they just don't seem to be able to keep up with modern trends. It's important to remember exactly why this law firm is here. We are a litigation firm. We are constantly in an adversarial relationship with every other firm with whom we deal, with the sole exception of those firms who come to us because they know that our disciplined approach to litigation, our technology, and our creativity, as well as our adaptability, put us out in front of the pack, and they want to enjoy the benefits of that added strength in what really is a form of civilized warfare. What you're about to learn is a means of managing documents that's designed to give you terrific performance advantage and speed when you're operating in the office or in the field somewhere, whether it's a hotel room, your home, a conference center somewhere, with or without a firewall. As long as you have internet, you'll be able to go like mad when it comes to processing and accessing documents in large-scale complex commercial litigation. Years ago, you would see us walking around with stacks of carefully tabbed notebooks. They were color-coded, they were tabbed and indexed, and they took a tremendous amount of work not only to assemble according to our carefully defined filing structure that we had at the time, but it also took a lot of work to carry them around. Nowadays, you can truthfully brag that if you have an iPad or a laptop, you can access every single document in the firm. The difference is that when we accessed our server from a remote location, we didn't have anywhere near the capabilities we have now for tagging, highlighting, annotating, redacting, filtering, or delivering documents. We could do all of those things, but not easily, not well, and not with the type of convenience that we now can enjoy with our SharePoint program. What we have done with SharePoint, essentially, is take all of those capabilities that we first acquired once we became paperless and turn them into a supercharged and much more easily accessed version of the same idea. Learning how to use this system will require you to master a finite number of specific steps, most of which each have their own training video or online checklist or both. We'll cover what those steps consist of at the end of this presentation, but know this, break it into one step at a time and you'll find that climbing to the top is easy. Now first let's talk about what is Office 365. Office 365 is a program that Microsoft has been developing as more or less their frontline consumer product for both business and personal use, and they've been working on this for about 6 years intensively. The idea behind Office 365 is to move the entire computing ecosystem, as that word is used in the computer world these days, into the cloud And by an ecosystem, what we mean is that there's a whole host of features, functions, applications, capabilities, and interoperative workflows that can be conducted within that closed system. Google has a similar system with G Drive and Google Docs and the rest of its Google apps. Microsoft's system just happens to be a bit more complicated and far more powerful for business use than the Google system, which is really more designed for individual use. The applications that you see here on this screen are just a few of those that are available if you have an Office 365 professional subscription account. Because you work here, you have such an account. So let's talk about a few of those key applications that are part of what we do with that account. First, we all know Word. Word will actually run in a browser if you're subscribed to Office 365 or if you've received a link to a document in Office 365 from someone who has a professional account. Also, if you have a subscription to Office 365, you can download the application itself, that's the program, and install it on your desktop, whether it's a Windows machine, an Apple computer, or a portable device like an iPad. As we look across the screen, we see SharePoint. SharePoint is very similar to its earlier cousin OneDrive, which we'll talk about in a moment, in that it provides a cloud-based storage location similar to G Drive, Box, Dropbox, or countless other cloud storage locations. The difference between SharePoint and OneDrive, or between SharePoint and those other cloud-based storage systems, is that SharePoint is far more programmable, and it interoperates with many, many programs, not just the ones you see listed on the screen. No other cloud-based storage system that we found after years of research would provide us that same level of flexibility and a scope of functionality similar to what we receive with the Office 365 and SharePoint solution. The OneDrive for Business account that comes with your Office 365 subscription gives you essentially the same storage capability that you would have with a Dropbox account, a Box account, or G Drive. We use these in tandem with SharePoint, but rarely. And we'll show you when we do use that in that fashion how it's accomplished. One final note is OneNote. OneNote is a note-taking application that's integrated into SharePoint as well as OneDrive, and it works together with all other Office 365 applications, as well as a standalone application that you can use on your desktop and your iPad. And all of those notes that you take on all of those devices will constantly automatically synchronize with one another. And each sub-notebook that you use in OneNote can store in a specific case matter on SharePoint so that everyone's notes are all going to the same location. So let's talk about SharePoint specifically now. What is SharePoint? Well, when you first get involved with it, you might find that there's a lot of complex and not very user-friendly fine print. But if we kind of zoom in on things and we say what's really going on, it's this simple. Microsoft SharePoint is simply a web-based collaboration management and sharing platform that allows you to handle Godfrey Johnson's documents, data, information, and much, much more. Now, you might be asking yourself why we're so high on SharePoint. What is it that's good about SharePoint? In fact, so good that it would make us abandon a carefully developed server technology that we had for years before we went to SharePoint. First and foremost, it's much easier to collaborate on the preparation of documents or review of documents by a group if you're using SharePoint than it would be with a on-premises server. You can process documents remotely as well as reading them remotely. And by process, what we mean is tag, sort, filter, highlight, annotate, redact, and bookmark documents. You don't need to worry about firewalls that can interfere with a VPN connection, which was a hard problem for us to solve when we were using only our VPN connection to our on-premises server. Hotel firewalls would wreak havoc with that and make it impossible to access documents at often the worst possible times. That problem is now gone. There's also a complete freedom of which platform or operating system you want to use, because web-based services don't require any particular operating system. All they require is a really good browser, such as Chrome, Safari, Firefox, or on the Microsoft side, their new browser, which is Microsoft Edge. Of course, you're probably wondering where Internet Explorer fits into all of that. And the answer is, you don't have to worry about Internet Explorer. Nobody who's good with web technology holds Internet Explorer in high regard. Microsoft has even stopped supporting that browser. But if you're in an Apple environment, such as Godfrey Johnson, you'll be using Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. And those all work very well with SharePoint Online. As well as your devices, your phone and your iPad, your Android phone, whatever you have, as long as it's got access to the internet and onboard browsing technology, you can make full use of SharePoint Online. There's much greater security in Microsoft servers than there was with our on-premises server. Although that server had 256-bit encryption on an SSL Komodo certificated security program, it was still easily hacked by comparison with the big boys and their massive server farms that have significantly better hacker detection or data loss prevention software protocols. So there's a lot more security in terms of protecting documents from inadvertent disclosure as well as data loss. We have no need to back our server up because cloud-based servers back themselves up across massive numbers of completely redundant servers. It's much easier to deliver documents to opposing counsel, clients, and the court if you're using an online cloud system. We could literally deliver 100,000 documents to opposing counsel in 7 different law firms in about 2 minutes using SharePoint Online, and that can only be done with cloud-based document management. Also, we have far, far more sophisticated, faster, and more effective searching capabilities. When we want to search the contents of documents and we have large document repositories, we find that the online services such as SharePoint Online are much, much better for that function than an on-premises server. And unlike Box or G Drive, the searching that is conducted is complete, meaning if I put a 100-page PDF in the system, it'll search the whole PDF, not just the first 3 pages the way Box does or the first 10 pages the way Google does. In SharePoint Online, the whole document gets searched and indexed electronically, which means that it culls out the search terms, no matter how big that document is. Server failures are no longer a big issue. As mentioned above, we can not only search, but we can sort documents on a whole host of potential criteria. You'll find examples later as to how that can make your job so much easier in large-scale commercial litigation. Finally, there's a potential for artificially intelligent, big data business analytic applications to attack huge archives of documents. All of this is designed to give you speed in the field so that you can pull out in front of your competition. Now let's just take a quick look. This is the server that we have on premises as of the date we made this training video and the date we made our full online transition to SharePoint, meaning that we went live and started putting all new matters in that cloud. Pretty sophisticated machine, but it was a standalone machine, and if something happened to it, we'd have to fall back on getting a new server, which could take time, and backing that server up from a cloud where we had stored our documents in a place where we could do nothing more than just retrieve them as backup information. By contrast, this is an example of one part of a massive building for Microsoft's cloud servers, and there are several such buildings distributed throughout the country, and they all talk to each other. Now, the biggest problem that you face as a lawyer in a firm handling large cases is this question: what's in this file, and what do I do with it? How can I make the correct use of thousands and thousands of pages of documents? Well, if you don't know what's in the file, you really don't have a chance to answer that question effectively, or for that matter, even to be competent as counsel. But the real rub comes from the fact that prior to SharePoint, we could not do anything with our documents very easily. We could access them easily. We could read them easily, unless a firewall got in the way or the VPN went on the fritz. But it wasn't possible to tag, filter, sort, highlight, annotate, or bookmark documents in a way that made them easily usable, which gives us a sense of futility when we sit down and think about a large document compilation, because there wasn't an easy way to start making our efforts with those documents stick in terms of a permanent work product that we could continue to fall back on and use as the case progressed. What SharePoint's done is basically created a line out of what was a big ball of confusion. So let's talk about the hierarchy of storage locations in SharePoint. Think of a computer server that had directories and subdirectories, or folders containing other folders containing other folders. All of those were simply places where information was stored. SharePoint works very similarly, but what makes SharePoint somewhat confusing when you first get started with it is the fact that Microsoft has its own vocabulary or nomenclature that it uses to describe various levels within the system. At the top level within a SharePoint account, you have what's called a site collection. In our account, we have 4 or 5 site collections, but all of our case matters are contained within a specific site collection that we call cases. Within a site collection, we also have subsites. Sometimes we use the word sites as synonymous with subsites, so don't get confused between sites and subsites because there really isn't any meaningful difference. Within a subsite, we can put 2 main things: libraries and lists. And then in turn, libraries and lists contain items. So that's the simple nomenclature that SharePoint uses to break down smaller and smaller sub-units of storage space within the SharePoint cloud system. Now, how does that overlay with the way the law firm stores its documents? At the site collection level, we have what we call the intranet, which is simply the shared pool of case files. At the subsite level, we have cases themselves: case 1, case 2, case 3. It could be Smith versus Jones, Davis versus Wilson. Each one of those cases is a separate subsite within the site collection called cases. Now, each one of those subsites has a series of libraries. What we see here are just 3 of the libraries: draft, court, and privilege. What we see here are just the simple examples of a few of our libraries for the sake of giving you the concept only. There's a library with each of those names: one library called drafts, one called court, and one called privilege in each of the case template subsites. There are several other libraries. This is just an abbreviated example to show you where in the hierarchy these items live. And then within each library, you'll have items. So for example, the drafts library might have a brief or several briefs or other items. The court library might have other pleadings like a complaint, an answer, a motion to dismiss. The privilege library might contain a letter or 10 letters that are all privileged. Now, notice this. At the case level, we have several libraries. We have a few more showing how they expand out. After we cover a few more points, I'll show you the entire library collection. Probably one of the toughest and trickiest parts of using SharePoint is to carefully manage the permissions that we give outsiders who may need to access material that we store in the cloud. That level of access is highly controllable. In fact, there are more than 7 levels of permission that we can choose from when we assign permissions to an outsider. But the key for you now is to recognize that what we have displayed here shows the inheritance of permissions. So unless permissions are individually reset somewhere as we move down the pecking order of storage locations, then the permissions that were assigned to the more senior container trickle downhill. So for example, we set site permissions for GOJO employees only. Every GOJO employee has complete unlimited access to each site, and that access is without limit in the sense that you can edit, delete, add, view, download, or send links or share from that site. Moving down, we have given limited access to very specific libraries to clients and opposing counsel. Some libraries we do not ever share. Some libraries we do share. For example, the court library is typically served through sending links and passwords to opposing counsel. And in that way, everything we add to that library is automatically available to opposing counsel as well as clients. At the folder or document level, we can assign specific privileges as needed. So for example, I could create a subfolder within a library that's designed to contain documents or items that I want an expert witness to see. I may simply share that one folder with him on a read-only basis, or read-only with the ability to upload information into an empty folder or the folder that we just discussed. One of the things that makes people pine away for the old paper days was the fact that you could pull out a tab of yellow stickies and tag documents with handwritten notes. So you could have a huge pile of paper in a bunch of different files and have a color-coded tagging system where every document that pertains to issue number 1 is tagged in blue and maybe says issue number 1 on the side of the tag. And you could apply those all throughout the case file. And in the current paperless office environment that most firms use with their on-premises servers, that's very difficult to do. But it's easy to do that in SharePoint. Also, sorting documents. I might want to change the order of things based on classifications, categories, or I may want to sort documents not based on the date they were generated or the date they were received, but based on the date of the event they describe. And for each of those documents, I might want to supply a description of what that event was. And I may want to simply filter my view so I only see the document name and the date of the event with a description of the event as found in that document. And if I did that, I would have turned a document compilation into a chronology. Terrifically useful tool. Finally, I can search for search terms. I can search for metadata. I can search the full contents of libraries with Boolean searches. And what that means is this word and that word, but not the other word, just like Westlaw. Now, let's take a look at the full structure of Godfrey Johnson's library and list architecture that was designed into the basic template that you use every day. We have a library called Attorney's Eyes Only, in which we put documents that by court order cannot be shown by us to our clients or our experts. This happens frequently in federal court, less so in state court, but it's there for that purpose. We have a library where we put all billing information about a file. We have the correspondence library where letters we receive in PDF form or send in PDF form are stored. We have a deposition exhibits library that we make available on a read-only basis to all counsel, and we give upload capability to the court reporters, which in turn maintain that library for us by uploading deposition exhibits right after deps are taken into that library, and then everyone can see those documents in that library. It's a central repository. There's a drafts library where you'd put in-progress documents, typically Word documents. The filed library is part of a larger compilation of shared content, which includes served-only information and filed information. Served-only information includes things like discovery responses and disclosures and supplements, whereas the filed library contains things like pleadings, motions, and attachments and briefs. We have a specific library for information that isn't relevant. It's not privileged, but it's just not part of the case, yet we don't want to throw it away, so we put it into the non-relevant library as a way of tucking it under the rug, but we can search that library and retrieve what we need to later if we find that we made a mistake in our assessment of what is relevant. We have a notes section, and the note documents are OneNote documents using the OneNote program, and there will be a special short training video just on OneNote later to follow. We have a folder where we put documents that have been registered in our records directory, and then we copy those documents into the pending privilege review folder, which is cleared out routinely as an attorney pulls items one at a time out of that folder and either moves them into the production folder or puts them in the privilege folder. The privilege folder contains the privileged information that was moved out of the PPR or pending privilege review file. The records library is where everything starts off. Now, this may seem to be coming at you out of context or out of chronological sequence, but we'll put this in order for you in a moment. The served library contains everything that's been served on the parties but not filed with the court, as I mentioned earlier. The trial library is a special collection of things that we just want to have access to as we narrow our focus in the days approaching trial and during the trial itself. Working copies is where we put documents that get annotated, scribbled on, highlighted, bookmarked, or are given other specific purposes that we would not normally share with outsiders. We also have three lists, actually three types of lists. We have an exhibit list, a witness list, and then a privilege and a production log. These, as I said, look like spreadsheets, but they're actually web-based databases where these bits of information are collated and easily accessible by us and our opponents. Now let's talk about metadata. Some people don't even know what metadata is, and it's very simply this. It's a collection of information pieces that are associated with or attached to an item, such as a Word document or a PDF. That could include things like the date it was created, the date it was modified, and other columns of information. The advantage of a program like SharePoint is that it allows us to define the structure of that metadata, and that structure will vary or change from one library to the next because the types of information that sit in those libraries and the things we do with it from those libraries will change from one library to the next. So each of those structures is called a content type. A content type is just which columns of information apply to a list of records that sit within a library. That's all it means. And we can change that, and I'll give you great examples here in a minute. So let's take, for example, the filed library. That means these items which have been filed with the court and served on counsel. We decided that we wanted to be able to put several different types of information into each of those items, not by changing the item, but by attaching or associating the item with these various columns of data. So in the filed library, here's what those columns consist of. The document number, if it's a federal court case, the title of the document, which is a descriptive title as opposed to the file name that might not tell you anything, the date it was filed, that means the date it was filed with the court, by the way, the party source who filed it, that would be a quick 1 or 2 word name. We usually don't use plaintiff and defendant, we use party names. The DCN or document control number range that has been applied to those pieces of paper using Adobe Acrobat before the items were moved into the pending privilege review file. A question of whether that was filed or not. Now, because the content type for filed and the content type for served are the same, the way the program knows to separate those is with this one question: was it filed? If it was, then the filed view filters those out, so you only see the filed items. If the answer is no under this column, then it filters those out, so all you see are the served but not filed items. The next is a question of whether it's privileged or not, whether it was redacted or not, whether it was part of a sealed filing or not, whether the item is at issue in the sense that it's an attachment to a brief or motion or a brief or motion itself. And the question asked in this yes or no column is that now ripe for a judicial ruling? Has there been a ruling? If the answer is yes, then you'd want to sort that out. If, for example, in the preparing of a pretrial order, you had to indicate which items still require judicial attention, what motions are still pending, this would give you a fabulous filter to find that out quickly, provided that the tagging of the documents is kept current by the attorney and the LSS. If that's not done, the whole system starts to fail. We ask who is the principally responsible attorney on the file because there are automated workflows that provide notices to the PRA when certain things happen. The same is true with the LSS. We need to know who the litigation support specialist is because certain workflows get triggered that give notifications to the LSS. The notification column itself contains the workflows that have been specially designed per our specifications to move documents around, give notifications, and keep us on top of the file. The attachment links, meaning links to other documents contained within SharePoint that were filed as an attachment or may have been sent as an attachment. Enterprise keywords. Now, this enterprise keywords column appears throughout the system. What this basically consists of is a blank column where you can assign as many keywords as you want. You can make them up, and the system will keep track of which ones you've made up in a given case site. And then you could later filter just on items that contain those keywords and you can search for items that contain those keywords within a library. The linked documents, which is a very similar thing to the attachment links, but has to do with things that were electronically linked per court order. And finally, the parent document to which a sub-attachment might have been connected. So if I have Exhibit A to something, was it an exhibit to a disclosure or a supplemental disclosure or some other parent document? What was it attached to? Now, let's take a look at the records library. It has similar but different content type, similar but different architecture for its metadata, as you're about to see. Like the previous library, it contains a column for a title so that you have a way to give it a meaningful title if the file name doesn't serve you. A description of the document that might be a little bit more detailed than just the title. The date that document was received here at Godfrey Johnson. The record type, which is a multi-choice column. The record source type, which would include things like client, third party, insurer, and so forth. The record source by definition. So, for example, if I have 4 different medical providers sending me records, all of those collections would have a record source type of medical record. But the record source will be different for each collection. One comes from Dr. A, one comes from Dr. B, one comes from Dr. C. So this way I can sort just on medical records, or if I want, just medical records from a particular doctor with this metadata. The principally responsible attorney and the LSS are also identified for the purposes of workflows, and whether or not a copy has been sent from records into the working copies library is a yes or no question. And by the way, when you check yes, and you haven't transferred that document over, meaning you haven't copied it into the working copies library, simply saying yes will cause that copying to happen automatically. And then, of course, enterprise keywords, those unlimited numbers of tags that you can put on documents. Now let's show you, for example, under record type, many of these items have multiple choices available to you. Record type has a large number. Obviously, there would be a lot of basic types of records that the system would have to adapt to. We want to be able to tag those quickly, so we've predefined many of these. And this is the list of just record type choices. Client record, construction record, deposition, email, employment, experts, financial, hearing transcripts, insurance. And insurance, of course, has further breakdown into claim files, reservation of rights letters, and policies. Legal research, medical, and video are the final choices for record type. Now, I promised earlier that we would come back and tell you what the real flow of documents is. Hopefully you've been able to piece it together without a specific picture, but here is a specific picture. All record collections, whether it's 1 document or 1,000, initially go into the records folder, and once they are tagged with date received and other brief information, they are not modified, deleted, or moved. We make copies from there into the PPR folder, the pending privilege review folder, and everything that goes into the PPR folder is moved out. It's copied into the PPR folder from records and moved out of PPR either into the production folder or the privilege folder. If it goes into the production folder, and again, that's moved, not copied, then of course each item that goes in there is added to the production log, which keeps track of what disclosure supplement each of the documents was identified in and attached to. If it's privileged, it goes in the privilege folder, and again, it's moved, not copied, and the item is then added to the privilege log. A little bit of additional development we see coming is that up until now, we've kept track of notes and email on a matter-by-matter basis so that everyone can see those things by taking notes in Daylight and connecting email to Daylight with Daylight Mail integration. We are going to cease that practice with SharePoint files because we can keep notes in the OneNote application inside a SharePoint site, and everyone can synchronize their individual devices, their iPads, their computers, or even a web-based version of OneNote to each one of those sub-libraries, which makes it very easy to find all of your notes and all of everyone else's notes, even if you're just working with the OneNote application. The same thing's true of Outlook. You can create a specific Outlook site inside a SharePoint site, and attach all the email to that. Synchronizing Outlook mail to the Google Mail professional account that we have is extremely easy and extremely effective. Lastly, let's talk briefly about this business information that is part of what is loosely called big data analytics. This is a statistical analysis of large compilations of documents and can produce things like graphic depictions of who's talking to who the most about various topics, what the topics are, what the lists are, and what the chronology of word usage is in the main search terms that the system recommends for you to use. We haven't implemented this yet, but it's coming, and it's only possible unless you have a massive server farm and a lot of computing power on the premises in the cloud. Now, our implementation plan for SharePoint as of the time this training video was created involves these considerations. It's going to be done gradually, because if we tried to move all of our 20 years of server records into SharePoint at once, it would be an unworkable and unreasonably expensive thing to do. So as we did when we went paperless, we pick a date and time and we say from this point forward everything will be on the new system. And gradually over time we reach that point where eventually everything is on the new system. So just as we had paper files coexisting with paperless files for a couple of years, we will have SharePoint files coexisting with premises server files in the Phenom server for some period of time. All new matters from July 15 forward will be open in SharePoint and not on the server, and there will be no duplicate systems. So if someone wanted to work out of the server because they haven't learned SharePoint yet, but the matter's been migrated to SharePoint, the server version of those files is placed out of reach and should not be used. Each lawyer will have some SharePoint cases immediately starting mid-July 2017, and we really need your feedback concerning the quality of this training and your experience with SharePoint, because if we can adjust the system or improve the training to make your life easier, we very much want to do that. We need you to complete your preliminary training as soon as possible. If you remember that I had showed you that picture of steps, and I told you that there were just a handful of individual functions you had to learn to perform, and that each function would have a demonstration video, just by watching those videos more than once, you'll quickly learn each of the basic functional building blocks of knowledge you need to know to use SharePoint. You don't have to design SharePoint, you just have to understand how our designed system operates. Every single one of those functions will have a short video, and in some cases, some written checklists that go with it that you can find on the Backroom website at gojosecure.com. We expect to make that transition complete within 1 to 2 years. And we can migrate older files into SharePoint if you wish for us to do so. So we anticipate that the percentage of utilization of SharePoint over time would be what you see on this graph. At first, we'll make rapid changes in the composition of our caseload. So more and more and more will go from Phenom to SharePoint. And by the time we're a year down the road, we should have about 90% of our cases running out of SharePoint. The reason the curve flattens out in the second year is that there are some large cases, particularly dormant ones that are on appeal, that aren't worth moving, and they just sit there for a long time. And after a while, those files tend to close, or we reach a point where we just say, okay, whatever's left, let's migrate it. And then we reach that stage that we think would probably happen in about 2 years, where 100% of our case files that are active are operated solely out of SharePoint. And again, those easy steps that you'll be seeing, these are the categories of information that each one of those little steps consists of. We will show you a video on the library structure. It's just an excerpt from this video. How to log in, how to access SharePoint on a browser or in an app, either a desktop app or an iPad app, and then how to quickly bookmark spots in SharePoint so that you can instantly go to those files or subfolders with one click of a bookmark item on your browser menu bar. We'll show you how to make new documents, how to open up a new draft and then save it to SharePoint, and then open it from SharePoint after that just by clicking, and it automatically updates and saves itself to SharePoint. We'll show you how to upload new documents once they've been OCR'd into the records library. We'll show you how to do the first pass of tagging, which is where we do bulk tagging for entire record collections, which have in common similar metadata, like they were all received on a certain date, or they all came from a certain place, and so forth. And that's very fast because you can tag items in bulk in SharePoint very quickly. We'll show you a video on workflows that have been designed into our template and what triggers them and how they work. We'll show you how to navigate, search, filter, and sort in a separate video. And then we'll show you how to process entire compilations of records that are PDFs using Acrobat, Preview, or good apps on the iPad such as TrialPad or PDF Expert. Then we'll show you the second tier of tagging, and this is more detailed. This is done as we analyze our documents. This is highly billable work, and it includes tagging for privilege and relevance. And then there's a third tier of tagging that takes place in working copies, where we're doing much more detailed, much finer degree of sorting and tagging and filtering and using that system to prepare for things like depositions, hearings, or collating documents that would be used in a brief. We'll show you how to share documents with outsiders. We'll show you how to verify that the permissions are correct, and we'll show you how to set up an upload library so that someone can quickly have a link that they click on and a browser window opens up that they can then drag and drop unlimited amounts of information into, and as soon as they do that, it's part of our server storage. We then move those records into the records library, but we would not actually move them. We would copy them into the records library so that we have an actual record of what arrived here in the upload folders. We'll show you how to use SharePoint on iPads, particularly useful with programs like PDF Expert, TrialPad, and other apps on the iPad. And all of that information is found on the GOJOsecure.com website.